Can we try?
So we should be live. You can try, Ernesto, wait a second. I need to make you host.
Mm.
Yes, now you should be able.
Okay. Do you see the slide?
Yes.
First slide?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
The live and
But we start with the Stella, right?
Yeah, but anyway, I
Yes, yes.
okay, thank you.
the live and
But we start with the Stella, right?
Yeah, but anyway,
Yes, yes.
okay, thank you.
the live and
But we start with the
I don't know if it's Hedgehog Day, but I can hear the same phrase being repeated again and again and again.
Ernesto, can you unshare your screen?
Qui c'è uno dice non funziona.
I think we can.
Oh, Beata.
Bisogna dirlo. Qualcuno...
We're all set?
Sorry, several people are writing to me that it doesn't work. I don't know what to do. The link doesn't work.
Did you send yesterday's link?
Yes.
It's the link for today that that you need. Federica, can you copy maybe the link on the chat and Luigi?
Everybody can take it, but everybody can take it from the left corner. There is a W, green W, but okay, I put this in the chat now, right now. And so this is the link that has to be shared. I can send you by email. Luigi, do you want to send you by email so that you can
I
forward?
can try. There are a couple of people who
Or WhatsApp? What do you...
Katra couldn't open it, and is the same as I used.
By mail arrived right. I used the connection written by Luigi yesterday.
Yes.
Everybody is working. The connection is working, Luigi. Don't mind. But maybe somebody can have some problem. And if you want to forward it, I can send you an email right now.
Billy.
So while we straighten that out, shall we start with some music?
Yes.
To officially launch the second pearl, I think we have a very good herald, Tony Magdalani, that will take us back to Cortona. We have probably forgotten in the meantime what Cortona looks like, so he will take us there. Thank you, Tony. It was good to see some old stones of Cortona again. Luigi, do you want to unmute yourself and give a formal introduction and welcome to the Pearl?
Yes, now do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my Cortona friends all over the world, thanks for being here. And as you know, this is the second Pearl, which is the event organized by Cortona Friends, which is a branching of the Cortona Week. We give every month a beautiful example of multidisciplinarity and system thinking. This time, it's really a particular event, as we have as our guest, as our hero, a famous personality, Ernesto Burgio. About him, however, later on. I would like to thank also our musician, Tony, who started, as always, the Cortona. Thanks, Tony. And also thanks to a very important friend of us, Francesco Lapenta, who is the director of the Institute for Innovative Future and Studies, located at the John Cabot University. And last but not least, I would like to introduce to you the one who already introduced herself, a real star. Her name is Stella de Sabata, the best Stella of all, and here she is. She will guide us this evening along the meanders of this Pearl. And well, let me show her to you again without any further talking. Stella, a te.
Grazie, Luigi. It's nice to have you as president of my fan club. So I would like to welcome you all, morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you may be. And I would like to thank my fellow colleagues of the Cortona staff, Cortona Week staff, Federica, Matteo, Miriam, Tony, Adelina, Naveen, all Cortonans such as Noah and Florian, for a great collective effort in bringing today's Pearl to you, which will see Dr. Burgio's 20 minutes presentation, 15 minutes breakout groups so that we can dialogue on the topic. We will have another musical break by Tony Magdalani to re-energize us for a collective 20 minutes exchange with Dr. Burgio on the questions and comments which will have arisen from our dialogues. We will plan to be together for 1 hour, 15 minutes, 1 hour and 30 minutes. We are recording the Pearl in the main room and streaming on Facebook. So please, you choose if you want to be recorded and seen, you can turn on or off your video. So apart from being a longtime Cortona friend, my association with Luigi dates back to last century. Luigi, I went back to my notes and it was 98. Some of you were not even born. I am professionally engaged in global health, and among other things, I represent a constituency which is particularly concerned by the current pandemic, and that is people with diabetes who have an increased risk of severe illness from the COVID-19. Diabetes is a complex condition which is often taken as the model disease, which needs to be addressed systemically. And I was therefore very pleased when Luigi asked me to moderate today's Pearl, as we will not only speak of health, but of the many implications for health that several human activities have, which also need to be tackled systemically. We have, as Luigi said, a very eloquent speaker on the topic today, and many of you have met him in Todi. Dr. Ernesto Burgio was born in beautiful Sicily, studied to be a medical doctor and specialized in pediatrics. He has several professional affiliations in the fields of oncology, pediatrics, epigenetics, environmental medicine, social medicine, and others. In the last few years, Dr. Burgio concentrated on epigenetics, environmental carcinogenesis, and developmental origins of health and diseases. He is a passionate advocate and science communicator and could spend hours, and indeed he actually spends hours talking about what really matters. So today in his 20 minutes with us, he will go over the main concepts that he presented in the Wall Street International Magazine article that we flagged to you, the origin of the coronavirus pandemic, the need for a systemic response, and the need for coordinated change on a global scale so that we can avoid similar and tragic events in the future. Ernesto has agreed. I will signal your remaining 5 and 2 minutes in a very Swiss way. And we look forward to your insights in the first pandemic of the Anthropocene. Ernesto, the floor is yours.
Well, tell me if the slides are okay. Can I show the slides? It's okay?
Yes.
Well, I must begin by trying very fast through, I must go very fast through the slides because it is a very complex argument and I must go very fast. I think that the title is very difficult to explain what we mean about the first pandemic of Anthropocene. We mean that I don't understand, there is a message here. Oh, anyway, we mean that it is not a sort of accident, this pandemic, but it is the symptom of a chronic disease of the planet, which is due to the war against nature the Homo sapiens has put in the last decades. And as it is a global event, we must consider the global context. From the two graphs here, you see that we have had a sort of big wave until December, and then a clear reduction in the number of cases and deaths in January. And then in the past 15 days, we had an increasing again number of deaths and cases. This is very important. And then we must consider that the lethality and mortality rates are much more extremely higher in Western countries. So we must try to understand why all this is significant for us. You see here that if we look at the global context, the mortality rates in Western countries were enormous, while China has only 3 deaths per million inhabitants, and Thailand and Vietnam and Australia and other countries has no deaths or very few. This is very important for me. Pandemics are epochal events due to great ecological and social upheavals, and this pandemic too is the consequence of the war against nature. I have no time to consider all these events, but you see that the Black Death and the flu pandemic, Spanish and other pandemics had 20 and 100 million deaths and so on. For example, measles and smallpox had hundreds million deaths. So what is the Anthropocene? What means? With this term, we indicate the current era in which Homo sapiens has assumed a sort of demiurgic role capable of rapidly transforming the balance of ecosphere. It's a sort of acceleration of all biogeochemical processes. And here we see the very rapid acceleration of all the way in which we use the planetary resource and all the consequences. And all the consequences also of the trends of the changing of social, for example, populations and the water use and the use of the resource and the huge increase in telecommunications and in transportations, and all this sort of great acceleration has a lot of consequences. For example, we see the global maritime circuitry that has increased so much that we have a bioinvasion phenomena everywhere in the world. And then this is very significant. We see that 60% of the mammals on Earth are livestock, predominantly cattle and pigs. 36% are humans, and just 4% are living mammals free on the planet. You see, this is terrific. I think it's very important, terrible cause of the changes in the biosphere, the disruption of the biosphere, deforestation, climate change, the wet markets, the megacities. Our labs, our biotech labs, are many reasons why the biosphere is disrupted. This is the true cause, it is reasons. And in the last few decades, we have put in place more than 100,000 synthetic artificial molecules. They are everywhere in the oceans. They are everywhere in the alimentary chains. So, for example, you know that we are, this is the WHO that has told us, in the post-antibiotic era, which means that at least 700,000 people die each year due to drug-resistant diseases. This is changing completely our biosphere because all the antibiotics are everywhere. Perhaps you don't know that we are a little part of the biosphere on the phylogenetic way of considering the biosphere, while the antibiotic resistance genes are ancestral genes that are everywhere. So we are losing our race against bacteria. It was a war. It was an idiot war against nature, because bacteria are microorganisms, are the great part of the biosphere. This is one of the reasons why we have 1 million animal and plant species that are threatened now. The great part of the biosphere is risk a sort of extinction. And this is not surprising that not only this pandemic, but the 75% of infectious emerging diseases are zoonoses, which means viruses that go outside, that spill over from the animals and go into our species. Here we see, for example, a global example of a lot of emerging infectious diseases every year. And the most dangerous one are the flu viruses, H5N1, for example, that is already in thousands of farms around the world. These are the farms in which we have found a lot of dangerous viruses in Europe, for example. But the changes from the flu era and the bat era is very dangerous because, you know, the bats are very dangerous for us, animals that are very similar to, because they are mammals, and their viruses are very similar to our viruses. And then bats are everywhere in the megacities, and they are very, it's very easy for their viruses to go outside from this reservoir and to go into our species. And we know it. It is 20 years that we are studying bat coronaviruses and Ebola and Marburg viruses and Nipah and Hendra viruses. These are a lot of viruses that come from bats and that can be introduced, that can spill over into our species. And we have this kind of resistant and dangerous coronaviruses that in many animals, as you see in this image, they are mutating everywhere in these animals, for example, in minks, and they can stay between us for years. And it is very difficult now to get rid from this kind of new coronavirus that are everywhere. Then another very important is to say that we were not, the Western countries were not prepared to face a pandemic, while Asian countries were prepared by SARS and avian flu and so on. Italy was the first Western country hardly hit by the pandemic. Here you can see the timeline, the first timeline. You see that in January, we had the Chinese researchers release a first complete sequence of the new coronavirus. It could have been a great advantage. We have not understood that it was very dangerous. And you see here in this timeline that in January, we had already cases of COVID, of coronavirus disease everywhere in the world. So what I mean that, for example, in Italy, we tried, I have written a lot of documents. I have convinced the Society of Pediatricians to propose to strengthen and organize the territorial medicine, to have quarantine areas and triage areas, and to have the volunteers to track and trace cases and their contacts through the country. But we asked it in vain. It is 1 year that we ask and we try to have it. We are not organized. In March, the ASEAN countries, China, Korea, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Vietnam, has completely stopped the epidemic, which passed through Europe and then to USA and then everywhere in the world. It was worse in Europe and in United Kingdom and in United States because they initially decided to let the pandemic take its course. It was a fundamental error, a sort of neo-Darwinian way of considering the epidemics, which is very dangerous because the virus changes and mutates continuously. And in March, our defense plans were not prepared. We have no protective devices. We had no diagnostic test. We have had no tracing and tracking. This is the situation now. We have not changed. Most serious mistake made was not to understand that the virus was really very dangerous because it had 8 mysterious mutations in the binding domain of the spike protein. You see here, this is a sort of mystery of the virus, of this virus. We had never previously found these mutations in the other bat viruses, and nobody has explained this mystery. We have tried to reconstruct the phylogenetics way of the cladistic of the virus, but we have not found until now the closest viruses that can explain why this SARS-CoV-2 has spread everywhere in the world. Here you see the first important variant. In the month of March, you see the countries, Europe and USA, in which unique variants became to be very contagious and it spread everywhere. And only few months later, Baric, who is one of the leading experts in coronavirus, revealed on the New England Journal of Medicine why this variant was transmitted very rapidly in culture and could pass from an animal to another. But well, in September, I tried to make another article, you see, I asked why people are not convinced that this is a true pandemic, because there were a lot of people in Italy saying, and many experts too, that we have exaggerated, that the virus was not dangerous. And this state of confusion had produced the second wave, because you know we have a lot of examples in Spain, in Israel, in Egypt, in Czechia, in which we have seen that the viruses were coming back from USA, from America to Europe. But anyway, Europe relaxed the measure and they didn't try to stop the contagions. This was a very big mistake, and Science wrote in September that the resurgence is driven by young people. It's a matter of time before the elderly will be affected too. It was very easy to understand in September if you see that the virus was coming back in Europe. At the beginning of October, there was again an exponential growth of cases, and 15 days after, hospitalization and intensive care and deaths. To understand why, a very important article by Richard Horton on Lancet could help us. Horton said it is not only a pandemic, it is a sort of syndemic. What does it mean by this word? Syndemic is, there is a sort of sequential or concurrent way to make sense that not only elderly people, but obese people, diabetic people, and other people are very concerned by the serious form of the diseases. Only these people die. And there is another factor of danger, which is pollution. I try to explain all these. It is not true that COVID only kills the elderly and the poor. It was a simplification in this article by Horton. The true way of considering death by COVID is that endothelial dysfunction, which means that only people that have chronically inflamed arteries are in danger, which means people with atherosclerosis, with hypertension, with diabetes, and with obesity, because all these people, and almost only these people, have critical forms by a sort of systemic immune inflammatory reaction. In these cases, this is not the virus which is dangerous. This is not a very dangerous virus for many people. It is dangerous because it is a sort of trigger. He can come inside. You see here in this article by Lancet, the virus can attack to the endothelia of the arterioles, and then it can go everywhere. And if it finds the arterioles of the tissues already inflamed, it can trigger a lethal inflammatory reaction, even in children. Even if you know that children make no many dramatic cases, some dramatic cases have this kind of pathogenic mechanism. It is always a sort of activation of the immunoinflammatory system. So why? Because perhaps, I think it is very important, we have a link to the air pollution. You see, in the same zones in Europe where you have much more ultrafine particle everywhere, you have a COVID lethality rates that are increasing. So why? Can we explain this? I think that we can. This is not a surprise, because WHO has stated that 10 million people every year die from air pollution. And what we begin to understand now is that the fine particulate, you see here, these are hair and sand. Here you see the particle, the particle matter, but the 0,1, the ultrafine particle, are much more microscopic than these, much more widespread in our cities, and much more dangerous because they come through every biological barriers. They can alter the expression and the epigenetic programming of cells. They can go through the barriers, the blood-brain barrier. They can go through placenta and go to embryos and fetus. So I think that this is a very dangerous way of considering this pandemic. This is a real syndemia because we have the virus which is a trigger, which has a sort of alliance with particulate matter, which is everywhere. People who is suffering by a low-grade inflammation, systemic inflammation, people who have already chronic diseases, obesity and diabetes, are triggered by the virus. But you see the particles are everywhere. Here you see the children, the white cells of the children. And then the virus and the ultrafine particles can pass together through the olfactory nerve. That's why we have dysosmia from the virus, and they can go together directly in the brain. That's why we know that we have a lot of people that have what we call the long COVID, which is very worrying, which is very dangerous way. And some scientists fear that this persistent inflammation in the nervous system can pave the way for neurodegenerative disease. And last problem, you see that both ultrafine particles and the virus can pass through the placenta and go to the fetus. That's why I think that we must pay attention in the next years, because direct effects by the virus and the placental damages and the maternal antibodies and cytokines and the maternal stress can make dangerous fetal programming. And to finish, I must go very quickly, but I must speak very rapidly about vaccines. You know that this is the great problem. We have a lot of variants, and the virus is mutating very quickly. So the risk is that you see here is the variant, the English variant, but we have the Brazilian one, we have a South African one. So I think that the main vaccination platform cannot resolve the problem. You know, what people don't know is these are experimental platforms. They were already ready in March, and the experimentation began immediately, and it was not possible to have a sort of correct experimentation of these vaccines, because you know that to have a correct vaccine we need 10 or 15 years. We decided to have vaccine in some months. This was, I think, dangerous. Anyway, I have no time to explain the difference between the vaccine, but it is important to know that some of these vaccine, for example, AstraZeneca vaccine, is a genetic modified virus. It is a virus taken from the chimpanzee, and this virus has been genetically modified to bring the spike protein inside our body, and nobody has tried to make this kind of experimentation before this pandemic. This is the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine, which have been synthesized in the laboratory, drawn by a computer. This is a sort of virtual spike protein that has been designed. So I think that it was a sort of experiment in vivo that we are doing with vaccines, and we do not know neither the duration of the immunity nor the ability to prevent infection and contagions, and we don't know if this vaccine can allow the eradication of the viruses. I think that we must hope that the vaccination go very quickly before we don't know if the vaccine can go rapidly when the virus is mutating all the time. And many scientists now say that the virus that causes COVID is becoming endemic now all over the world. So I mean, this is the last slide. I think that we must speak about this pandemic as the first pandemic of the Anthropocene, because we can have the rapid increase of two concurrent and complementary epidemiological phenomena. One is this kind of epidemiological transition, the increase of a chronic disease, which is due to ultrafine particles, to the inflammation, and to the fetal programming disturbed in the embryo and fetuses. And the other is the other pandemic, which is the increase of zoonosis and of spillover of new viruses. The risk is that these two pandemics are together in the next years. So we must try to block this pandemic by all the correct ways, which is block the contagions, which is take and begin to trace the virus everywhere, as in China, as in Japan, as in the Asian countries. Otherwise, we will risk to have a lot of problems in the next years. The vaccines and drugs are important, but they are not enough to block a pandemic. This is what I think it is important to know. Many thanks.
Ernesto, thank you for this whirlwind. You have taken us through a terrible, terrifying journey. You have concentrated a lot of information, but you have done that very clearly. You have conveyed that very clearly. And you have given us a lot of food for thought for our breakout groups. It really looks like the way that we're generally going is a shortcut, and we cannot allow ourselves a shortcut. We need to do things the right way, and it is the systemic way, and it is the way that we're not trained to think or to act, or at least our leaders don't seem to. I would give the floor to Miriam, who is going to explain how we're going to organize ourselves for the breakout groups. We will talk for about 15 minutes. And then, as I said, we will have a musical break, and then we re-engage again for 20 minutes with Ernesto, with our comments and questions. Thank you again, Ernesto, and over to you, Miriam.
Please, Ernesto, unshare your screen.
Thank you so much, Ernesto. Thank you so much, Stella. So in the line of the Cortona week, as many of you know and have experienced for many years, you would like to use even this virtual platform now to connect. It's important in Cortona that we do it in person with all the celebration and the music and the arts and the beauty of the landscape we are. So maybe you can just recall those memories and use these 15 minutes we can share among each other here now to listen to each other, to share, and by sharing, listening, as always, learning from each other, and also enjoy doing so. So that's what we definitely do in the Cortona week, enjoy what we do together. And we'd like to create a space here for 15 minutes with the intention to connect, like usually with respect, dignity, and a certain equity we can invite in here, because we all are living this life in these times and are connected to what is surrounding us and all looking for answers, otherwise answers and maybe new questions, otherwise we wouldn't be here. So Matteo will be so eloquent to invite soon the breakout rooms. Many of you are familiar with that. Otherwise, just feel that you'll be guided. We'll have, of these 15 minutes, 4 people in one group. That's our intention, more or less, some 5. We invite you to stay in if possible. And even if you haven't been in a small group, online on Zoom, just maybe give it a try. And you need not to speak if you don't feel like, but just a bit maybe enjoying that we can be together here. The returning after the 15 minutes will be automatically. So you find your path back to the main room where we'll go, instead of going into the plenary dialogue with Ernesto, first have a moment to breathe, to feel into, to pause and to enjoy. So there will be another musical interlude at the end. So now this is the sequence we're going to follow. You'll get a breakout room invitation on your screen. You'll see, please join group 1, for example. So just please click on it to join the room. It's important that you join the room because the main room, this room will be streamed and recorded, and it will be a group with Ernesto and a few people who know that they'll be recorded. Ours in the small groups, we won't be recorded. It's just us. Nobody will listen into it. So it's just, there's a certain privacy, and hopefully that provides a safe space to really share. Then the guidelines is 3 minutes each. So total of 12 minutes. And please take care of time, equal time distribution among yourselves. And we'll broadcast a message. You'll see it on the screen, inviting to change to the next speaker. What to say in the group. So to focus, it's short time. Our suggestion is for the 3 minutes that you have, maybe briefly your name, the location, and then what is alive in me right now after the talk, my feelings, thoughts, questions. And then the others listen, and then we switch to the next one. What is alive in me right now? The idea then is that you come up with a question after the 12 minutes and everybody has shared. So it's a short dialogue, and please prepare to type in the question that you come up with. It can be a comment, a question to Ernesto for later on, to type it into the chat. And so we can refer back to you for group 1 asking, please ask your question. Yeah, so that's the output of the small group. The groups will close automatically. So we invite you to join now and enjoy the time in here. We see you in 15 minutes. The others who are live on streaming, they can join the main room. Thank you very much.
for Irene. Irene, could you try to join a breakout room? Did you get a message? I cannot hear you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Did you get a message about joining a breakout group?
Yes,
Can you press on that?
yes. Is that okay?
Yes, yes, go for it.
Yes, I tapped on it.
Yes.
Okay.
Luigi, for us, we are in the plenaria now, and with Adelina, Ernesto, and a few people that were not joining in breakout groups. And for the people that are in the plenaria with us, so we are recorded. So if you don't want to share your screen, you are doing well. We are live on Facebook. So Irene, in this moment, you are live on Facebook.
Oh dear. I checked.
Ernesto, do you join us to have a small chat?
I haven't understood what I must do now is to
We have a dialogue between me, you, Luigi, and Adelina.
yeah, but a dialogue about my speaking. No, I think that
Yeah, so we should just maybe give you some. I can start and ask you something, and so in a way that we are an example also for the people that are following us on Facebook.
no, I haven't understood. If there are some question to answer to, or if we must speak together, I haven't understood what you mean.
So I will start saying who I am, and then I will say a few things on regard of your talk, and the same we can do with Luigi and Adelina. And then we will be a question, and then just because before we have still 8 minutes before the people are still dialoguing in the breakout groups. And then the question then will be chosen later from the breakout groups. But we are online now, so Adelina, if do you agree we can just have a small dialogue between us, right? You are muted, Adelina?
No, it's okay for me. Hi, Ernesto.
Ciao.
I want to start with a little question, because if it's possible, what can we do for I don't know, like a primary prevention? Because virus has a lot of varianti. Vaccine is I don't know, is a experimental drug. So what can we do with our style of lifestyle, or what can we eat, or what could you assume, like vitamin D or so on? What would you suggest?
Seriously, what I mean is that we cannot face a pandemic only trying to get rid of it. We must try to understand that there are a lot of reasons why we have a pandemic so difficult to trace and to face. So what I mean is that every country should do the same thing that China and Japan and Taiwan and Australia and New Zealand has put on, which means tracing and blocking contagions before vaccinating. This is, I think, very important. And we decided not to do this because we have decided to, if you want, to experiment our vaccines and our way of considering diseases as something to struggle against. I think it's not correct. I think that we are paying our way of considering diseases as biological accident. That's why the Western countries cannot react in the correct way. What I mean is the pandemic can be a very important moment to consider that our way of considering diseases is not the correct way, and our way of combat against microorganisms and viruses is not the correct way. Then we must put on all the social and the, how you say, the strategies to block the contagions, and then we can put together all over the world a sort of correct organization to consider zoonosis and, for example, agriculture and, for example, deforestation and all the other problems that make, for example, bats come inside the great megacities and push a lot of viruses to make spillover inside our species. But this is the second problem. For the moment, we must put on the strategies to block the pandemics. And I don't think that the vaccine is the first strategy to put on. This is, I think, the real problem.
Yes, if I can add on this, I noticed in the field of research that the last year many funds and many grants then were really all moved to virus research, and they were sometimes cut, some money was cut from sustainability and other research that actually would be a long-term, like you suggest, you say correctly, a long-term way to defeat the same thing, right? So I was really surprised to see that the funds were really shifted a lot and moved from other important things that are just not short-term, but long-term way to tackle the same problem.
Yeah, but what I mean is also that I have worked, I was a sort of consultant of the Italian army 15 years ago, when we faced the first coronavirus and the avian flu. And we had already decided that vaccines were not the first step, but the first step were the strategies to make the territorial medicine much stronger. We decided not to do this. And I think that in March, when Pfizer and AstraZeneca and the other corporations were financed by the government to experiment their vaccine, it was why they had the vaccines already ready to prove. Many people say we have found a very strong vaccine in 6 months. This is a sort of miracle. No, it is not true, because we know that the vaccine were already in place. The vaccine, I mean the Pfizer vaccine, the RNA vaccines, and they have, how do you say, taken this situation, the pandemic opportunity, to make a great experiment all over the world and to give experimental vaccines to hundreds million people. This is very dangerous in course of pandemics because the virus is changing, is mutating, and we cannot gain, we cannot win in this sort of race against the viruses. The viruses changes much more quickly, and our vaccines in some months will be useless. And then what can we do? We can change the vaccines and re-vaccine a second time all people that have been vaccinated now. This is foolish. So I think that it will not work. I think that our strategy is not the correct one. I think that China and Thailand and Vietnam and Cambodia and Japan has chosen the gold standard against pandemics. And we couldn't, because Big Pharma has decided, not our government. This is what I think, what I really think.
Ernesto, I see you in Borges Library. I think that we are all back. Matteo, do you want to
Yes.
send the other video so that we look at the questions that have been posted in the chat, and then we can organize the dialogue right after that?
Perfect.
And Ernesto, I'm here with Italian if there is a need for it. Well, that was really good. Thank you, Tony. And it also gave us the opportunity of exchanging here on the chat. There are several threads that are going on, and knowing that we have 20 minutes, we should be strategic about how to go with them. So maybe shall we take the most direct questions and leave the one with a longer response for the end, maybe? Okay, so there is a chat within the chat. Ernesto, are you there?
Here I am. I'm waiting for you because you must help me.
Yes, of course.
Understanding what people ask, because my English is not so good.
Your English is very good, and it's,
no, it's not very good.
Than ours is,
Anyway.
I can tell you that. So the first post is, I think, a little too complex, and we can keep it for a bit later. Noah asks, what is the scientific evidence for the proposed hypothesis? And probably it would be best to refer to the magazine where you would cite all the references that we could not see in the slides. Would that be correct, Ernesto?
I haven't understood. If I can give the slides, and I can send all the references of the problem that I have put inside, but I couldn't do it in 20 minutes.
Of course. Noah, would that satisfy you to go through the references and the bibliography, and then perhaps take it up with Ernesto if you have a particular point? I don't see Noah, so I will take some.
Sorry, no, I was saying no, I think this is perfectly fine. We had this question in our group discussion, and this is why I want to raise it, because it's a rather complex subject, and I think we need some time to go through the understanding of what is available. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. David Berti comment is, or question, are we dealing with the pandemics in the right or the best possible way? Well, obviously, we've had a 20-minute presentation on we could certainly do better. And if we know, I'm interpreting Ernesto's words, but and you can correct me, Ernesto, but if we do the same thing with the next pandemic, and if we don't do anything to avoid the next pandemic, we're really in a bad place. Ernesto, would you second that?
What can I say? I think that in 20 minutes, it was possible to pose some question and to try to explain some problem. The problem about pandemics in the next years, it's very complex, and we know we were waiting for a pandemic. It was 20 years that we were waiting, and we knew that a pandemic was imminent, if you want. But we were waiting, and we are waiting, the big one, which means a virus that can be a real killer. And we are frightened about, for example, some viruses like H5N1, which is a flu virus that has a lethality which is 50 times much more lethal than SARS-CoV-2. So I think that it is a sort of chance that we must take. This pandemic can help us to prevent the other pandemics that are much more dangerous than this one. This one is a sort of, if you want, I cannot say an exercise, because anyway, we have had 3 million people who are we consider that died from this virus. But anyway, this is not perhaps the big one. So what we have learned in these months is that if we don't put in some strategies in our systems, not only hospitals, not only medical systems, but everywhere in the world, to make difficult to these viruses to come from for example, to make spillover, we will risk much more than now. So I think that to think that with drugs and vaccines we can resolve the problem, this is not true. But we have told it, we have explained it. It is 20 years that a lot of us say we cannot think to face pandemics and new viruses and microbes only by drugs and vaccine. This is foolish. And now Western countries has done this, we say this mistake. I don't think it is a mistake. It was, they have decided to do in this way. So it is difficult for me to explain all this. I think it is a sort of consideration, a sort of
Ernesto, as you were mentioning the East, Florian and his group mentioned that the biggest megacities in the world are in Asia, but they were less affected despite high levels of pollution, for example, in Beijing. How can we explain that and learn from it?
Yeah, and that's why in 20 minutes it's not possible. The difference, the big difference between the mega cities in for example, in Asia and in Africa and our cities is that we are polluted. We have a great pollution. We have been, how you say it? It is 3 decades that we have pollution. 40 years. This makes that a lot of people are exposed to pollution in Italy or in USA or in England. It is 40 years that they are exposed. That's why their arteries, their endothelia are inflamed. While in China or in India, even if their cities are now very in danger, they have not been exposed since 40 years ago. This is a great difference. Then we have a medium age of population, which is we are much older than them. They are 50 years old while we are 30 years much more old than them. And then, and it is the more important problem, is that our fetuses, our embryos are exposed to pollution since we can say the last century. This makes the difference because a lot of children in Europe and in America and a lot of young people are inflamed by pollution because they have been exposed in utero. They have been exposed where they were children, while in China or in India, the pollution is much more recent. This is the difference. In 20 years, you will see, for example, you have a lot of people with Alzheimer and autism in Europe and in USA because they have been exposed to a lot of pollutants 20 years ago or 30 years ago. We begin to have autism and Alzheimer, for example, in Mexico City or in New Delhi. Only a little part of people have this kind of diseases because pollution is very, how you say, I cannot say, it's very recent in these cities. It's completely different. The situation, you cannot make easily propose a sort of how do you say, I cannot say it in English. È difficile comparare, no? Fare un paragone chiaro fra due posizioni, due situazioni epidemiologiche totalmente diverse, con una pollution che dura da 40 anni da noi e da loro è recente. Non lo so dire meglio.
An easy comparison between two different epidemiological situations, where in one you have 40 years of presence of pollution, and another which is different. Ernesto, can we go from people to and cities to another level? Roberto and his group say syndemia at physiological level, at environmental level, and at psychological level. That is to say, spillover of fear, anxiety, unconscious drives. Do you agree that this is, first of all, a problem of wrong slavery relations with animals?
I need 1 hour to if you pose some question like this. What I must try to explain something. I think that the article by Horton is very interesting, but I don't use the term, the concept of syndemia in the same way, because Horton said that this is not a pandemia, this is a syndemia in which only elderly people and poor people and only people that had a lot of diseases die. So this is a very dangerous way of considering these pandemics, because I think that this is the same way in which people say that a lot of people didn't die owing to the virus, but they die with the virus. This is dangerous. This is not the way I consider the pandemic. I think that this is the first sin pandemia. This is a pandemia in which the virus is a trigger and the particulate is another trigger. So it is a sin pandemia. Do you understand? It's completely different. So I think that the concept of syndemia, if we utilize it in a very simple and not deep way, and we say syndemia is that there are a lot of factors that we must consider. For example, psychological factor, and we say that fear has been a very dangerous factor, and a social, for example, the way in which many poor people were much more exposed. It is true for many diseases, much less in this case. For example, in Africa or in Asia or in India even, we had much less people dead than in USA and in England. This is different from the other infectious diseases because the mechanism of the inflammation is different. And these two triggers, the ultrafine particles that act through decades in people, and the virus that comes and is a sort of trigger that joined the first trigger. This is a different way of considering these diseases. So people die because the new trigger can inflame the arteries of people that are already inflamed by pollution. In this case, you can say this is a syndemia, not in a general way of considering the syndemia as a disease due to social and psychological factors. This is another way of considering it. I think in this case, the mechanism is very clear, very punctual, very precise, if you want.
The question Ernesto brought back also to the relationship, the perverse relationship that we have with animals. If we think about intensive farming, for example, and I suppose that this is a bridge to the next pearl with Susan. but our relationship with animals as a factor in bringing onto us the situation that
yeah, but I mean, this is another problem. If you look at my slide in which I have shown that 65% of animals on Earth are in intensive zootechnia, how do you say? This is foolish because the great part of nature doesn't exist on this planet now. Only 3% of animals are free. This is foolish. So I mean that this pandemic is only the beginning of the crisis, only a symptom. That's why I think this is the first pandemic of the Anthropocene, because it is evident that we risk to have a lot of crises like these if we don't change our way of producing, for example, meat. But this is a problem. It is 30 years that someone has told us that it is foolish to have this kind of production and this way of considering animals as how do you say, I cannot say it correctly in English. You can explain better. We cannot torture trillions of animals without paying our madness. This is another problem. It's not the same problem as syndemia. It's a background problem.
Indeed. Now, a few of the groups and individually have brought the question of what could we as individuals do on a daily basis to contribute to a better state, so that we individuals have our own responsibilities. For sure, governments and systems have their responsibilities. But while we wait for governments to come up with a systemic solution, what can we as individuals do on an everyday basis?
I think that we must work together, because science cannot be controlled and conditioned by big pharma. I think that this is a great problem. We cannot accept that the corporation decide about our life and the life of nature and so on. So I think that we must struggle together to put together all the good scientists that know that we have a bad science that is dominating the earth. I think that this is the real problem. Pandemic is a symptom of a great disease, which is a sort of spiritual disease. We are, this is our madness. We are paying. This is the first time that we can see that a great disease is circulating everywhere in the world, but it is the climate change or the other problems are the same disease, are the consequence of the science, which doesn't respect nature and the planet. What we can do, we must try to speak in a correct way, in a simple way, and to have a lot of scientists that work together about this. We must try to have a sort of scientific network of free scientists that speak about all these. But everywhere in our universities, in our scientific societies, not only free scientists like me or Fritjof or others that are, for example, Fritjof is here, and I am very happy to see him. He is a sort of great spiritual leader, not only a great scientist. So I think that we must join him and to have a sort of great network of free scientists and say that the pandemic we can win against the pandemic if we find another way of considering it. as a sort of, if you can say it, a sort of disease of the planet that we have provoked by our war against nature, against animals. So we cannot go outside. You know what I mean? I mean that the climate change is important. A lot of problems are important, but we don't consider the biological crisis, which is the worst and the most dangerous, which is not the crisis of humanity. It is the crisis of the microbiosphere, which means bacteria and viruses that are 70% of the biosphere. That's why I think the treaty was a sort of prophet in this kind. His work about the systems, the biological systems, the biological networks on Earth. We are disturbing something that has 4 billion years of history. Pandemic is the result of having disturbed 4 billion years of biological networks. This is the problem.
Indeed, and I would say that along with the united scientific message that is accessible to people, another thing that we can do, because let's face it, follow the money. Why do we have concentration on vaccines, on big pharma? Follow the money. So investing in companies that reward the investor in different ways than just money, or trying to steer a different remuneration of capital is probably also part of the solution. We could go on with Ernesto for hours, and we know that in his other occasions he spends a lot more time than with us on these subjects. We also know that it's a special day today. If you allow me, I would give the microphone back to Luigi to wrap up, make a bridge to the next pearl, and then before we leave, we have a little gem in our pearl.
Stella, sorry, I would like to make a proposal. I am completely in agreement with Ernesto said, and we discussed it also before with the Frigio in a particular group. We could write a letter, an open letter, denouncing what is going on, because all this situation is coming from the behavior of humanity, and this letter could be signed by all of us, of course, if we want, and sent to our government and possibly to the European authorities. And this could be the first step to explain what is going on. So I suggest to Ernesto to write this letter, and I will be honored to sign, and also I suppose Frigio and also Pierluigi and many other of us. So this is my proposal.
Thank you for bringing this to the attention of everybody. Thank you, Franco.
Yeah, thank you.
Luigi?
I am here. Let's see. Do you hear me?
We can see you and hear you.
Okay. Well, the most important thing is to thank Ernesto, and you heard the voice of a scientist, in the sense that he has given us hard data. And I was very struck by some of them. First of all, his consideration that this virus problem is a consequence of our treating badly the nature, namely is a consequence of our ecological way of living. I think this is hard because there is no way in sight whereby we can change our way of treating nature. And this for me almost means that the virus is a kind of endemic kind of problem, will be with us as long as we have this ecological problem. And another striking statement was this combination which between the pandemic, the virus from one hand, and pollution from the other. I have been thinking, as many of you, why countries like Cambodia or Thailand or Burma don't have any or very few casualties. And I have never thought that the main reason would be the fact that we are living with pollution since 30, 40 years, and they not. I think this statement of Ernesto, the combination between virus and pollution, is a very important point, and the one that struck me. And the last point is what he said about the big pharma which can take over. Yes, but we should also consider the big pharma, pharmaceutical pharma, are just one stone in a bigger system. We are in a systemic view. The behavior of the big pharma is a consequence of our so-called liberal democracy, of our neo-capitalism, by which profit is the main driving force. So the problem, I think, it goes further than the pharmaceutical company to invest our entire neo-capitalistic way of living, which makes the problem only more and more difficult. But again, thanks to Ernesto and for his hard words. You know, it's not that he gave us very sweet pillows to swallow, but it's only through hard science words that we can acquire some consciousness of what is going on. And for that, again, thanks to Ernesto, and of course to all the other who participate to this lively hour. I see now Frijov in the, Frijov, I am sure that he would have hundreds of questions, but not this time. Again, thanks to all of you for being here. Thanks particularly to Stella, who has to say something else. No?
Yes, stay, because Ernesto, can you please show at least your face instead of your picture? Thank you very much. And Tony?
And please open the microphones.
Yes, Ernesto, beautiful. Since when you were born, you kept this day for us. Happy birthday, tanti auguri. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Tanta felicità.
Grazie.
And let me add finally, and then I disappear, all those who are here should also be here in 1 month time, because in 1 month time, at the end of April, we will have the Pearl number 3, where we will have as main hero a fantastic woman who is sitting with us. I don't know if I see her. Susan, you're here. Yeah. Susan, let's see. I want to show you Susan.
Yeah, she makes so. She's here.
Bye-bye. Susan Eirik, and this time at the end of April will be a very green period. Here she is. You see, a fantastic woman, and as I say, will be very green because we will talk about farms and about animals, and we are all very curious and happy to wait for you, Susan. April will be also spring, flowers and sun. Bye-bye to everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bella.
Thank you to everybody. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was great.